We now have Mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, Quinton Lucas, who has decided that he's starting to open up his state a little bit, but with regards to religious services, church, that the churches are going to have to observe the 10-10-10 rule. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Constitution Corner. I want to talk to you today about the First Amendment. Seems like kind of obvious, doesn't it, that when you're dealing with the Constitution, that First Amendment is a big one. And it's a lot to do with free speech. But I think one of the great misconceptions of our Constitution is this idea of radical separation of church and state. The idea that our founding fathers adamantly set about banning religious speech in the public square. That's not true. It's not anywhere in the Constitution. It's not anywhere in the founding documents. This was based on a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a private citizen significantly later than the colonial period. And so this concept of separation of church and state is a big one, particularly for progressives. They have used it to drive all aspects of religion out of the public sphere. Think about the degree to which the government is really cracking down on instances of religious belief or expression in the armed forces, in the military. There's a story in the news just the other day about how Christian worldview was being persecuted by certain aspects of the armed forces. And we, of course, got the legendary example of how in 1962, progressive educrats managed to get prayer removed from government schools. For the first 112 years or so of the American government public school system, prayer was an integral part of what the so-called public schools were. And it wasn't until 1962 that prayer was forced out under this specious separation of church and state idea. Go back to that First Amendment. The purpose of the First Amendment, the actual purpose of the First Amendment, the purpose is to protect speech. And I think one of the misunderstandings of the First Amendment is people don't realize that when protecting speech, the first thing that the founders were interested in was protecting not political speech, which of course is protected, but religious speech. The entire premise of the Constitution's First Amendment is that we must not endorse or persecute and exclude any religious speech. So it is perfectly legitimate for believers and non-believers to express their faith or lack of faith pretty much in any public forum, as long as the government doesn't endorse one or another. And so this is the important issue, it seems to me, that the free speech that is primary in the First Amendment is actually religious speech, because the First Amendment is a free speech and free religion, so to speak, amendment. The fact that they're put together in the same amendment suggests that the founding fathers' absolute regard for religious speech, maybe at the expense of all other speech, was going to be guaranteed in that First Amendment. Of course, through the First Amendment, we recognize political speech and the freedom that we have for that. But again, you can't overlook the fact that the First Amendment ties speech in general and religious liberty together in a really important and progressive, I think, way. A way that was very progressive for the world in 1789, 1776, when these things were being adjudicated. Fast forward to the COVID virus, and fast forward to Kansas City, Missouri. We now have Mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, Quinton Lucas, who has decided that he's starting to open up his state a little bit, but with regards to religious services, church, that the churches are going to have to observe the 10-10-10 rule, right? That we are not going to let more than 10 people or 10% of the building's capacity to be at church at any particular time. And this is really staggeringly unconstitutional. It is shocking. It's almost as bad or worse than what Mayor de Blasio of New York City did a couple of weeks ago, where he actually sent his government thugs, to break up a Jewish funeral for a very popular Jewish rabbi, and then went on the offensive by using his bully pulpit, de Blasio did, to call out Jews by name for having the temerity to violate his unconstitutional stay-away orders, right? Stay sheltered orders. And so these are very serious and flagrant attempts to undermine religious liberty. Again, if you can think about how many hospitals in the United States now are crumbling because they're not allowed to do any other procedures besides take care of coronavirus victims. There are no an article in the news today about the number of people dying, dozen or so, from heart surgeries that they weren't able to get because of COVID. And so when you think about this is a deadly game that's being played back and forth here, and we've got to go back to some sensibility with regards to this. Recognize that our First Amendment rights prioritize, not secondarily or tertiarily, prioritize the right of people to express their religious opinion. And again, you have a situation now where the left is stopping them religious people from expressing their religious opinions in church, let alone in the public sphere. This cannot stand. And if we're going to continue with the great protections and the great reverence we have for the idea of a republic and constitutional values, this has got to be a line drawn in the sand. It is perhaps our most fully enshrined, most obvious, most foregrounded right, the right to religious observance and conscience. Don't just know your Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. Live it. This has been Liberty News Hour. As always, you can go to thenewamerican.com and jbs.org for more information on these topics, as well as more shows.